Hello, bedtime thinkers, and welcome to the Bedtime Discoveries. You found your way to the Bedtime Discoveries. Tonight, we will drift slowly and calmly into the quiet beauty of Saturn's rings. Saturn, the golden giant, drifts in the outer reaches of our solar system, and wrapped around it are its delicate, glowing rings. They are one of the most enchanting sights in all the heavens. Tonight, we will explore their mystery, their history, and their quiet grace, all in a gentle way that helps your mind settle and your body relax. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you are tonight. Leave a soft comment with your location and the time you're listening. It's always a comfort to see how far and wide our bedtime journeys travel. And if you feel at peace here, please give this video a gentle like and subscribe to the Bedtime Discoveries so you'll always have a calm place to return to when you need rest. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself drifting slowly through the quiet darkness of space, far away from Earth, past Mars, past Jupiter, out into the deeper reaches of the solar system. There, floating like a golden lantern in the distance, is Saturn. Saturn, the sixth planet from the Sun, a world wrapped in soft yellow hues, striped with gentle bands of clouds, and crowned by its delicate rings. It is one of the most breathtaking sights in the night sky. A planet that has fascinated human beings for thousands of years. When we speak of Saturn, we are speaking of a giant, a gas giant, made mostly of hydrogen and helium, the same building blocks as our Sun. But unlike the fiery Sun, Saturn is cool and calm, a planet without a solid surface, where winds sweep endlessly, and storms dance across its atmosphere. Its size alone inspires awe. Saturn is so immense that more than 700 Earths could fit inside it. And yet, despite this size, Saturn is not heavy in the way you might think. In fact, it is the least dense of all the planets. If there were an ocean big enough, Saturn could float upon it, like a giant golden balloon. This dreamy nature of Saturn makes it unlike any other planet. It is not a place we could stand upon, for there is no ground, no soil, no rock beneath our feet. Instead, Saturn is a world of clouds and gases, layer upon layer, extending deep into the unknown. But what draws our eyes most of all are not just the planet's size or its golden clouds. It is the halo, the luminous rings, a sight so unique that it feels almost unreal. They circle Saturn gently, stretching far out into space, like a cosmic crown softly glowing in the starlight. When ancient people looked up at Saturn, they could see it only as a wandering star among the constellations. Its true beauty, the glowing rings, remained hidden, waiting for the invention of telescopes to reveal their secret. But even before we could see the rings clearly, Saturn held a place in human imagination. The Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, all watched it closely. They gave it names, told stories about it, and wove it into their myths. To the Romans, Saturn was the god of time, a figure of harvest and cycles. Fitting in a way, for Saturn moves slowly in the sky, taking almost 30 years to complete one orbit around the sun, a slow dance through the heavens, marking the rhythm of time itself. When you think of Saturn, you can picture it as a timeless traveler, a golden giant moving patiently, never in a hurry, and around it the delicate threads of its rings, turning endlessly, like the ticking hands of a cosmic clock. As we float closer in imagination, we might notice Saturn's subtle shades, cloud bands of pale gold, soft cream, and faded amber. No sharp colors, no loud patterns, just a quiet, gentle blending of tones, like watercolors brushed across a canvas. Everything about Saturn whispers calmness and quiet elegance. Its atmosphere is alive, with winds that can reach hundreds of miles per hour, and yet, from a distance, the planet seems so still, so serene. A paradox of motion hidden beneath stillness, just as in our own lives. Sometimes the calm we show on the outside conceals the storms that move within. And yet, Saturn's storms are not violent in appearance. Some form vast, pale ovals drifting across its surface. Others gather at its poles, like the mysterious hexagon at the North Pole, a storm shaped in 6 perfect sides, a shape that has lasted for decades, perhaps centuries, a storm sculpted into symmetry, a reminder that even chaos can find order in the universe. As we continue to picture Saturn, let us imagine its place in the solar system. It lies far beyond Earth, about 1.4 billion kilometers away. So far that light itself takes over an hour to travel from the sun to Saturn, and when sunlight finally reaches its rings, they shimmer softly, like frozen petals caught in eternal orbit in the silence of space. Saturn does not roar or blaze. It does not cry out for attention. Instead, it glows gently, a quiet beauty waiting to be noticed. And so, as we begin our exploration tonight, let us rest with the thought of Saturn, a golden lantern in the dark, surrounded by its delicate crown, a world so vast, so gentle, and so timeless that it feels more like a dream than a planet. Imagine once more that we are floating through the quiet darkness of space, and there ahead of us, Saturn continues to shine, so serene, so timeless, a golden jewel resting in the cradle of the cosmos. As we approach, let us not rush. Instead, let us pause and think about what Saturn has meant to us here on Earth. For thousands of years, people looked up, saw the wandering lights among the stars, and gave them names, gave them stories, gave them meaning. To the Babylonians, Saturn was associated with Ninurta, a god of agriculture and healing. To the Romans, Saturn was the god of time and harvest. And even today, the word Saturday still carries his name. It was the day dedicated to Saturn, a reminder that the echoes of this planet's presence reach even into the rhythm of our weekly lives. When we say Saturn, we are not only speaking of the planet, but of the centuries of imagination, awe, and reverence that human beings have wrapped around it. It has been a symbol of patience, of cycles of endings and beginnings. For Saturn's orbit is long. It takes nearly 3 decades for Saturn to complete its journey around the sun. And so, when ancient astrologers watched it, they saw it as a marker of time, of wisdom, and of change. But mythology and culture are only one way we have seen Saturn. The other way, the scientific way, came later with telescopes and spacecraft, and it gave us a clearer, sharper, and yet no less magical picture. When Galileo first turned his telescope to Saturn in 1610, he saw something odd, tiny lumps, strange shapes on either side of the planet. He thought perhaps Saturn had ears, or maybe small companions. He could not quite tell what they were. His telescope was too small, too blurry. The true nature of the rings was still hidden. It was not until 1655 that Christian Huygens, with a better telescope, looked carefully and realized Saturn was surrounded by a thin, flat ring, a ring that did not touch the planet, but circled it gracefully in space. It was a discovery that changed astronomy and opened our eyes to the idea that planets could hold such delicate, otherworldly beauty. From then on, Saturn became not just a wandering star, but the planet of the rings, a world that felt like a vision out of a dream. And in truth, Saturn does feel dreamlike. The planet itself is a giant of gas, mostly hydrogen, the lightest element, and helium, the same gas that makes balloons float. It has no solid ground where you could stand. If you try to land, you would sink down through its atmosphere, deeper and deeper, until the pressure crushed you into nothing. It is a world that cannot be walked upon, only admired from afar, a reminder that not every world is meant to be touched. Some are meant only to be seen, to be wondered at, and yet there is something soothing in this. For Saturn's role in our night sky is not to invite us to step upon it, but to inspire us from a distance, to remind us that beauty can exist in places we will never reach. Let us also picture Saturn's soft colors. Its clouds are gentle, pale gold, creamy yellow, soft browns. No harsh contrasts, no blazing storms like Jupiter's great red spot. Instead, Saturn whispers in subtle tones, like a watercolor painting left to fade under the sun. Its beauty is understated, and yet utterly captivating. Sometimes when we think of the universe, we imagine violence, explosions, collisions, stars burning, galaxies colliding. But Saturn is the opposite. It is a symbol of calmness, of grace, of elegance, a giant that chooses not to shout, but to glow softly. If Earth is the home we know, and Jupiter is the roaring guardian of the solar system, then Saturn is the poet, the quiet dreamer, floating in the vast silence of space. And of course, we cannot forget its most striking feature, the rings. Even from afar, even in imagination, the rings are what makes Saturn Saturn. They circle the planet like a crown made not of gold or jewels, but of ice, dust, and rock, shimmering in sunlight, as if the universe itself had decided to decorate this planet in delicate lace. The first time a spacecraft sent back close-up images from Voyager in the early 1980s, people on Earth gasped, for the rings were not flat, not simple. They were filled with structure, patterns, gaps, and waves, like grooves on a record or ripples across a still pond. They were alive with detail, far more complex than anyone had imagined, and yet, from a distance, they appear simple, serene, effortless. That is the paradox of Saturn, complex up close, but calm and soothing from afar. As we continue to drift in our thoughts tonight, let us remember this about Saturn. It is both vast and light, both stormy and calm, both ancient and timeless, a planet that floats between contrasts, and yet holds them all in harmony. Perhaps this is why Saturn resonates so deeply with us, because it reminds us that life too could be full of opposites, and still beauty can exist quietly among them. So let us linger a little longer, gazing at Saturn's soft glow, and feeling the calm presence it brings, a golden lantern resting in the velvet dark, a timeless traveler of the stars. Let us imagine ourselves floating gently in the shadow of Saturn, far away from the warmth of Earth, wrapped instead in the soft glow of a distant sun. Here, space feels colder, quieter, the stars shimmer more clearly, and before us, Saturn looms, vast, golden, and serene. As we gaze at this giant, we might begin to sense how small our own world truly is. For Saturn is not only larger than Earth, it is part of a realm beyond the inner planets, a realm of gas giants and icy mysteries, a part of the solar system that feels like the borderland of dreams. To put it into perspective, if Earth were the size of a small marble, Saturn would be a great orange ball beside it, and circling this orange sphere would be threads so delicate they look like lines of light drawn by an artist's hand. Its distance from us makes it appear faint in the night sky, and yet, with a telescope, even a small one, the rings appear, and suddenly Saturn becomes not just another planet, but a world unlike any other we can see with our own eyes. This moment, when you first glimpse Saturn's rings through a telescope, is something many astronomers never forget, for in that quiet moment, you feel a connection not only to the universe, but to every human being who has ever looked up in wonder. And Saturn offers plenty to wonder about. Its day, for instance, is short, just a little over 10 hours. That means the planet spins very quickly. So quickly, in fact, that its shape is slightly flattened at the poles and stretched around the middle. It is a reminder that even a calm, golden planet is always in motion. This fast spinning, combined with its gaseous nature, creates patterns in its clouds, bands that wrap around its body like softly painted stripes. Unlike Jupiter's bold and dramatic features, Saturn's patterns are more subtle, so gentle you might think of them as whispers of color, barely visible, but full of elegance. Now, imagine drifting further back, to see not just the planet, but its whole system, for Saturn is not alone. It is surrounded by a family of moons, dozens of them, each with its own story, some large and icy, others small and rocky, but all of them circling like companions, adding to the majesty of Saturn's realm. The largest, Titan, is bigger than Mercury, and it has thick, hazy skies and lakes of liquid methane. Another, Enceladus, hides beneath its icy shell, a global ocean, and geysers that spray water into space. These moons, together with the rings, make Saturn not just a planet, but a miniature solar system of its own, a kingdom in the dark, ruled by calm beauty. And yet, even in this grand system, the rings remain the crown jewel. They shine in the distance, delicate and quiet, so wide and yet so thin, so fragile and yet so eternal seeming. As we will explore in the coming keynotes, these rings are not solid, but made of billions of tiny pieces, pieces that catch the light of the sun and turn it into a soft, glowing halo. But before we move ahead, let us linger one last time in the presence of Saturn itself. Think of its golden hue, its soft stripes of clouds, its quick but quiet spin, its family of moons drifting nearby, and its crown of rings shining gently in the dark. Saturn is more than a planet. It is a vision, a reminder of elegance and mystery, a symbol of time, of cycles, of beauty. And as you breathe slowly now, let yourself imagine drifting alongside it, resting in the calm glow of its presence. For in the vastness of the cosmos, there are worlds that roar with fire and worlds that blaze with light. But Saturn whispers, and sometimes the whisper is all it takes to quiet the mind and ease the heart. For most of human history, Saturn appeared to us as nothing more than a golden star in the night sky. It wandered slowly among the constellations, fainter than Jupiter, dimmer than Venus, and yet there was something different about it, something mysterious that made people pause. To the ancients, it was a god, a symbol, a marker of time, but to the eye alone, Saturn's true beauty was hidden. The rings, so wide, so fragile, so breathtaking, were invisible without the help of instruments. And so, for thousands of years, the rings existed in secret, circling Saturn silently, like a treasure locked away in the dark. It was not until the early 1600s that the first glimpse of Saturn's mystery was revealed. In 1609, Galileo Galilei pointed one of the first telescopes at the heavens. His instrument was crude, small, and blurry by today's standards, but to him, it was a magical window into stars. When he turned it towards Saturn in 1610, he was startled. The planet did not look like a simple round ball. Instead, it seemed to have strange lumps, protrusions one on each side. In his notes, he described Saturn as having ears, or perhaps two smaller companions, something unlike anything he had ever seen. But Galileo's telescope could not resolve the rings clearly. To him, Saturn was puzzling, even frustrating, a planet that refused to show its true face. Still, the mystery remained in his heart, and he continued to wonder what secret Saturn was hiding. Over the decades that followed, telescopes improved. Other astronomers peered at Saturn, and each time the picture grew a little sharper, a little clearer. They noticed that sometimes the strange shapes disappeared, fading until Saturn looked round again, only to reappear later, a puzzle that deepened the mystery. It was Christian Huygens in 1655 who finally solved it. With a more advanced telescope, he observed Saturn carefully night after night, and he realized the truth. Saturn, he wrote, is surrounded by a thin, flat ring, which touches it nowhere and is inclined to the ecliptic. A simple sentence, but one that revealed a breathtaking reality. Saturn was encircled by a vast, thin ring, a structure unlike anything else known in the solar system. Imagine what that must have felt like to look through the eyepiece of a telescope and see, for the first time in history, a world crowned by a glowing band of light. It must have been like peering into a dream, a sight too delicate, too otherworldly to seem real. And yet it was real. The rings were no longer a hidden treasure. They were now part of our human story, a discovery that filled the world with wonder. But the story does not end there, for the rings were mysterious. And mysteries always invite questions. What were they made of? How wide were they? Why did they sometimes seem to vanish? Over the centuries, more and more astronomers turned their gaze to Saturn, each one peeling back another layer of the puzzle. Giovanni Cassini, in the late 1600s, discovered a gap in the rings, a dark band separating the A ring from the B ring. This gap, still known today as the Cassini division, proved that the rings were not a single solid band, but multiple structures, intricate and complex. It was as if Saturn were whispering to us, revealing its secrets one by one, but never too quickly, never all at once. From Galileo's blurry ears to Huygens' thin ring, to Cassini's division, the story of the rings slowly unfolded, like a flower opening in the light of dawn. And still, the mystery continued. For even as telescopes grew stronger, The question of what the rings were made of remained unanswered. Some thought they were solid, others thought they were made of many tiny pieces. It would take centuries more, and spacecraft flying close to Saturn, before the true nature of the rings was finally revealed. But even in those early years, the discovery of Saturn's rings changed everything. It reminded us that the universe is filled with beauty we cannot see with the naked eye, that wonders can hide in plain sight, until curiosity, patience, and a touch of luck bring them into view. So, tonight, as you drift softly toward sleep, imagine Galileo's astonishment, peering through his tiny telescope, seeing something so strange, so unexpected, and not knowing yet what it meant. And then imagine Huygens, seeing the truth more clearly, and realizing that Saturn was crowned by a ring of light. In those quiet moments of discovery, our view of the universe changed, and Saturn's rings became not just a cosmic feature, but a symbol of wonder, a reminder that beauty is always waiting for those who choose to look closer. When Christian Huygens first described Saturn's rings, the world had only just begun to grasp the scale of the solar system. Telescopes were new. The night sky still seemed filled with mystery. And in that era, to say a planet wore a ring was almost like describing a crown in the heavens. But as soon as Huygens shared his discovery, astronomers everywhere wanted to see more. Saturn became a subject of fascination, a puzzle that invited closer and closer study. One of those who gazed intently was Giovanni Cassini, an Italian-French astronomer in the late 1600s. He built upon Huygens' work, and with careful observations, he discovered something extraordinary. The rings were not uniform, not a single solid band, but divided into parts. He noticed a broad, dark gap between them, a space where the glow of the rings seemed to vanish. This gap, now called the Cassini division, separated what we now call the A and B rings. It was one of the first clues that Saturn's rings were not a single structure, but a system, intricate, delicate, and full of detail. For centuries, astronomers had wondered, were the rings solid? Were they thin, glass-like sheets wrapped around the planet? Or were they made of countless small particles, so tiny that they blurred together from far away? Some, like the mathematician James Clerk Maxwell in the 1800s, began to use physics and mathematics to test these ideas. Maxwell calculated that if Saturn's rings were solid, they could not remain stable. Gravity would tear them apart. The only way they could exist was if they were made of countless small pieces, each orbiting Saturn independently. He was right, but in his time, no telescope could confirm it. The rings remained a mystery that teased the edge of human understanding. And so, generation after generation, astronomers kept pointing their telescopes at Saturn. Some drew sketches. Others described faint patterns and ripples they thought they saw, each observation adding a brushstroke to the still incomplete picture of Saturn's crown. Imagine the patience of these observers, nights spent peering through fragile instruments, the chill of the air biting their fingers, and above them, Saturn glowing faintly in the darkness, just waiting for someone to look closely enough. In the 19th and 20th centuries, with better telescopes, astronomers began to see more detail. They noticed fainter rings. They watched as Saturn tilted toward and away from Earth, causing the rings to appear thinner, sometimes even vanishing from sight completely. When the rings turned edge-on to us, they became so thin they disappeared, a narrow line, invisible to the human eye. For those who had never seen the rings before, it was almost shocking. One year Saturn wore its crown proudly, and a few years later, it seemed bare, ringless, a magician's trick played by the cosmos. But each time the planet tilted back, the rings would shine again, reminding us of their fragile beauty. Still, it wasn't until the age of spacecraft that the true secrets of the rings began to unfold. The Pioneer missions in the 1970s and later Voyager in the 1980s flew close to Saturn and sent back photographs. For the first time, we saw the rings up close, and what we saw took our breath away. The rings were not smooth at all. They were filled with gaps, waves, ripples, patterns caused by Saturn's moons, by gravity, and by countless particles interacting with one another. Instead of a single ring, there were thousands of ringlets, woven together in delicate layers. From Earth, the rings had always looked simple, almost serene, but from space, Voyager showed us their complexity, like a finely woven fabric, so intricate it could only be crafted by the universe itself. And still, mysteries remained. The exact origin of the rings, their age, their future, were questions Voyager could not fully answer. But the spacecraft did give us one certainty. Saturn's rings were far more beautiful, far more intricate than anyone had ever dreamed. As you imagine this history, let yourself picture the slow unveiling of Saturn's rings. From Galileo's blurry ears, to Huygens' thin band, to Cassini's division, to the delicate ripples seen by Voyager. Each step was like peeling back another curtain, revealing more of the cosmic stage. And with each revelation, our wonder only grew deeper. For Saturn's rings are not simply a discovery. They are a story of patience, of curiosity, and of the quiet determination to look closer at the night sky and to find beauty where once there was only mystery. And so, when you think of the discovery of Saturn's rings, perhaps you can feel connected to all those who gaze before you, astronomers with their fragile instruments, scientists with their notebooks, spacecraft drifting silently past, all of them joining in a single human journey, a journey of discovery, guided always by the quiet beauty of Saturn. By the late 20th century, humanity had already unlocked many of Saturn's secrets. We knew the rings were not solid. We knew they were made of countless small pieces. We had seen the Cassini division and glimpsed their ripples through Voyager's eyes. And yet, the more we discovered, the more questions arose. How old were the rings? Were they as ancient as Saturn itself? Or were they young, fragile, and temporary? What were they made of in detail? And why do they shine so brightly when space is often so dark? To answer these questions, we needed to return to Saturn, not with a telescope this time, not with distant photographs, but with a spacecraft built to stay, to orbit, to linger. In 1997, NASA launched the Cassini spacecraft, named after Giovanni Cassini, the astronomer who had first mapped the division in the rings centuries earlier. Cassini carried with it a suite of instruments, cameras, sensors, and detectors designed to study Saturn in exquisite detail. After a long journey, Cassini arrived at Saturn in 2004, and for more than a decade, it became our eyes, our ears, our gentle traveler through Saturn's realm. The images it sent back were breathtaking. Close-up views of the rings showed them not as flat sheets, but as structures filled with clumps, braids, waves that seemed to ripple like water. Tiny moons, called shepherd moons, were seen carving paths through the rings, shaping their edges, pulling particles into narrow arcs. Cassini confirmed what Maxwell had predicted so long ago. The rings were made of countless icy particles, ranging in size from grains of dust to chunks as large as houses or mountains. Each piece orbited Saturn independently, like a miniature moon, and together they formed the shining bands we see from Earth. But Cassini also revealed something unexpected. The rings were far more dynamic than we thought. Particles collided, scattered, and sometimes drifted inward toward Saturn. Moons tugged at them, gravity sculpted them, and sunlight slowly pushed at their icy surfaces. The rings, it seemed, were not eternal. They were alive, changing moment by moment in a slow cosmic dance. Perhaps the most profound discovery was this. The rings are not as old as Saturn itself. Evidence suggests they may be relatively young, perhaps only 100 million years old, formed long after Saturn was born. If true, then the rings are not a permanent feature, but a temporary wonder, a fleeting moment in the planet's long history. Imagine that for a moment. If the rings are young, then they did not exist when the dinosaurs walked the Earth. And one day, far in the future, they may fade away as particles fall into Saturn or scatter into space. For us, living in this moment of cosmic time, to see Saturn's rings is a privilege. We are alive in the rare era when Saturn wears its crown, and perhaps that makes them even more precious. Cassini's mission ended in 2017 with a final dive into Saturn's atmosphere. But even in its last moments, the spacecraft gave us data about the rings, about their composition, their mass, their fate. It was a gentle farewell, a closing chapter in humanity's most intimate exploration of Saturn. And still, our journey with the rings continues. The Hubble Space Telescope, and soon telescopes like the James Webb Space Telescope, continue to watch Saturn from afar. They see the rings shimmering, fading slightly with time, changing under the influence of gravity and light. Each observation is like another brushstroke on the canvas, filling in the details of Saturn's quiet masterpiece. And yet, for all our knowledge, the rings retain their mystery. They are too large, too complex, too delicate for us to fully capture. They remain in some ways beyond our reach, and maybe that is as it should be. For Saturn's rings are not meant to be solved completely. They are meant to inspire wonder, to remind us that the universe still holds secrets, and that beauty sometimes is most powerful when it is not fully explained. So tonight, as you drift into rest, you might picture that long history of discovery, from Galileo's blurry telescope, to Huygens' realization, to Cassini's division, to the spacecraft that now bears his name, each step a thread, woven into the larger story of human curiosity. And in the silence of the night, perhaps you can imagine Saturn still, turning slowly in its orbit, its rings glowing faintly in the starlight, just as they have for millions of years, waiting quietly for the next curious eyes to look closer. When you look at Saturn's rings through a telescope, they seem like a smooth band of silver light, delicate and glowing, a cosmic halo wrapped around the planet. But if you could drift closer, sliding quietly among them, you would see something very different. The rings are not solid at all. They're made of countless small pieces, tiny worlds in their own right, each orbiting Saturn in perfect balance. Most of these pieces are made of water ice, pure, bright, reflective ice. shining in the sunlight like freshly fallen snow. It is this icy surface that gives the rings their brilliance. Every shard reflects the light of the distant sun, so that together they glow like a shimmering veil in space. But it is not only ice, mixed in our darker materials, dust, rock, and grains that carry with them the ancient history of the solar system. These tiny fragments may be the remains of shattered moons or comets that strayed too close, tore apart by Saturn's gravity. Some particles are no bigger than grains of sand, others are as large as mountains, and between them lies a vast emptiness. Space is wide enough for a spacecraft to drift through, though to the human eye, they blend into one continuous glow. Imagine floating among them, looking out at icy fragments spinning quietly, each one tracing its orbit, never quite touching for long. The silence would be absolute, broken only by the gentle whisper of motion. What is perhaps most astonishing is how clean the rings are, compared to many other objects in space. They shine with purity, almost free of dust. Scientists believe this may be a clue that the rings are relatively young, for over time, space dust should darken them, and yet Saturn's rings remain bright, as if freshly made. As you picture this composition, ice and rock, dust and fragments, woven together into one glowing crown, you can begin to sense the quiet beauty of Saturn's rings, not just as a sight, but as a collection of stories. Each shard of ice, each grain of dust, has traveled through cosmic time, and now, together, they dance endlessly around Saturn. It is a reminder that what seems simple from afar is often wonderfully complex up close. And so, the composition of Saturn's rings is not just ice and dust. It is a library of the solar system's memory, written in particles that orbit endlessly, reflecting both light and history. If you imagine drifting slowly through the rings, you would quickly notice that not all the particles are the same. Some would glimmer like crystals, pure, bright, almost transparent, while others would look darker, dustier, absorbing more light than they reflect. The majority of Saturn's rings, perhaps 90 to 95%, are made of water ice, but this ice comes in many forms. Tiny grains no larger than a grain of salt, fragments the size of pebbles or boulders, and even enormous chunks that could tower like small mountains. Each of these particles, whether small or large, travels on its own orbit around Saturn, but together they create the illusion of a solid ring, just as raindrops falling together create the image of a silver sheet in a storm. The ice itself is ancient. It may have come from a moon torn apart, or from comets that shattered when they strayed too close to Saturn's gravity. Whatever their origin, the icy fragments carry within them the chemistry of the early solar system, a frozen record of water, minerals, and trace elements that have existed since the time of planetary birth. Mixed into the ice are tiny grains of dust. These darker materials, probably rocky fragments or carbon-rich compounds, give the rings subtle variations in shade and brightness. In some places, the rings gleam pure and white. In others, they are streaked with faint shadows, like gentle brushstrokes on a painting. From far away, these details blur into beauty, but up close they tell stories. A fragment of ice might once have been a piece of a moon's surface. A darker grain could be the last remnant of a comet from the far reaches of the solar system. Scientists believe that by studying the mixture of ice and dust in the rings, we can learn not only about Saturn, but about the early days of our solar system when chaos and collisions were common, and worlds were still taking shape. The purity of the rings is another puzzle. If the rings were billions of years old, space dust should have darkened them by now, coating the ice and dimming their brilliance. But instead, they remain dazzlingly bright, suggesting they are young, perhaps only a few 100 million years old. This youthfulness is surprising. It means that the rings may be temporary, not a permanent feature of Saturn, but a fleeting phase in its long life. And if that is true, then we are witnessing them in a rare moment of time, a cosmic performance that will not last forever. Imagine standing on Earth, looking up through a telescope, and realizing that you are alive during the brief era when Saturn wears its shining crown. It gives the rings a bittersweet beauty. Not only are they stunning, but they are fragile, impermanent, a reminder of the delicate balance of the universe. And within each icy shard, within each grain of dust, lies the quiet memory of where it came from and the promise of where it will one day go. When sunlight reaches Saturn, it must travel more than 1 billion kilometers, crossing the cold emptiness of space. And yet, when it touches the icy particles of Saturn's rings, that distant light is caught, reflected, and scattered until the rings glow with a brilliance that makes them visible even from Earth. The composition of the rings, their blend of ice, dust, and rock, is what allows this shimmering display. Water ice, so pure and bright, act like a cosmic mirror. It reflects sunlight with astonishing efficiency, giving the rings their dazzling white appearance. But the ice is not perfect. Mixed within it are darker fragments, tiny grains of silicate rock, carbon-rich material, and dust collected from the vastness of space. These impurities soften the glow, adding depth and subtle shading to the rings. The result is a canvas painted by the cosmos itself. From Earth, the rings often appear uniform silver, but up close, spacecraft like Voyager and Cassini have revealed delicate differences in brightness and tone. Some regions shine with blinding whiteness. Others are streaked with faint hues of beige, or touched with ghostly shadows. Scientists believe that these variations arise from the distribution of materials in the rings. In some areas, the ice is nearly pure, gleaming like untouched snow. In others, dust has mingled with the ice, muting its brightness, as if time itself had left a shadow. The particles themselves are constantly colliding, shattering and reforming, exchanging fragments of ice and dust. Each impact leaves a subtle mark, a ripple in brightness, a faint change in texture. It is a slow, silent choreography in which billions of tiny pieces shape the face of Saturn's rings. When viewed in different wavelengths of light, ultraviolet, infrared, and radio, the rings reveal even more secrets. To the human eye, they are pale and shining, but in ultraviolet, they show differences. In ice purity and grain size, in infrared, they glow faintly with heat, reminding us that even in the cold depths of space, there's still warmth hidden within. Perhaps the most poetic thought of all is this: the composition of Saturn's rings makes them both fragile and enduring. They are fragile because ice can be shattered, dust can scatter, and gravity can pull particles inward towards Saturn, and yet they endure, lasting for millions of years, resisting the emptiness of space, and holding their delicate form against the pull of time. When you look at them, you are not seeing a single object. You are seeing billions of individual stories, each particle a traveler, orbiting in harmony with the rest. Together, they form a crown for Saturn, but separately, they are fragments of history, whispers of comets, echoes of shattered moons, and as they reflect the sunlight, they also reflect something of ourselves, our curiosity, our longing to understand the universe, and our love for beauty that transcends explanation. So the next time you imagine Saturn in the night sky, remember that its glow is not simple. It is a sum of countless pieces, ice, dust, and rock, woven into a delicate fabric by gravity and time. It is, in its quiet way, a cosmic reminder that beauty often comes, not from what is whole, but from what is gathered together, piece by piece, to form something greater. When you first see Saturn through a telescope, the rings may look like a single, shining band, a smooth circle wrapping gently around the planet. But the truth is far more intricate. The rings are not one simple structure, but many layered, divided, woven together like threads in a cosmic tapestry. Astronomers, through centuries of careful observation, have given names to the most prominent parts. The A ring, the B ring, and the C ring are the largest and brightest. Separating the A and B rings is a broad dark gap, the famous Cassini division, discovered in the 1600s. Beyond the A ring lies the faint F ring, a delicate braided band, sculpted by small moons that circle close by. And still farther, there are even thinner, dimmer rings, almost invisible from Earth. Each of these rings is made of countless particles, but their differences in brightness, thickness, and density give each one a distinct character. Some are wide and bright, others narrow and faint, as if Saturn was not just one crown, but many layers of ornaments. The B ring is the brightest and thickest, dominating the view from Earth. Its icy particles are packed closely, reflecting sunlight with dazzling brilliance. The A ring just beyond it is also bright, but slightly less dense, with the Cassini division marking its inner edge. The C ring, closer to Saturn, is much fainter, a ghostly veil that can be seen only through strong telescopes. And then there's the F ring, thin, fragile, and dynamic. It appears almost braided, its strands twisted and shaped by two small moons, Prometheus and Pandora, that act as cosmic shepherds. They tug and pull, creating ripples and clumps, sculpting the F ring into patterns that shift and shimmer over time. What makes the structure even more fascinating is how thin the rings are compared to their width. Though they stretch for hundreds of thousands of kilometers across Saturn's skies, their thickness is astonishingly small, sometimes no more than 10 to 30 meters. Imagine a sheet of paper spread wide across a football field that is the kind of proportion we are speaking of, vast in breadth and yet unimaginably thin. This contrast between immensity and delicacy is part of their quiet beauty. From afar, the rings look solid, eternal, but up close, we see how fragile they are. A structure built not from stone or steel, but from billions of tiny pieces, dancing in harmony. When sunlight falls across them, their divisions and layers become clearer. Shadow lines stretch across Saturn, marking where the rings block the light. In these shadows, the geometry of the rings reveals itself, a natural design drawn by gravity's hand. The structure of Saturn's rings reminds us that nature is both orderly and chaotic. There are clear divisions and named regions, but within them, countless particles swirl in a complex ballet. Patterns emerge, but they are never static. Like a living painting, the rings change subtly with time, always the same, yet never identical. And so, when you gaze at Saturn through a telescope, know that what appears to be one shining band is in fact a layered masterpiece, a collection of rings within rings, each with its own story, its own rhythm, its own quiet role in the beauty of Saturn's crown. If the large rings, A, B, C, and F, form the broad framework of Saturn's crown, then it is the gaps and divisions within them that reveal the planet's most delicate artistry. The most famous of these is the Cassini division, a broad dark band that separates the A and B rings. At first glance, it looks like an empty space, a void where the rings simply do not exist. But when spacecraft pass close, we learn the truth. The Cassini division is not truly empty. It is filled with fine particles, sparser and less reflective, spread out thinly enough to create the appearance of darkness. Why is the Cassini division there at all? The answer lies in gravity's invisible hand. A small moon of Saturn, called Mimas, tugs at the particles in this region. Each time a particle in the division tries to orbit Saturn twice, Mimas orbits once, a resonance that destabilizes the particles, pushing them away, leaving the gap we see. This is the quiet magic of resonance, a simple ratio of orbits, creating order in the midst of chaos, sculpting a cosmic groove. That marks Saturn's greatest division. But the Cassini division is not alone. There are many smaller gaps. The Encke gap, the Keeler gap, and countless narrow spaces, woven through the A ring and beyond. Some of these gaps are carved by tiny moons that orbit within the rings themselves. These shepherd moons clear narrow paths as they travel, pulling particles with their gravity, shaping sharp edges where order replaces blur. The Encke gap, for example, is maintained by the tiny moon pan, a world so small it barely holds a spherical shape, yet its gravity is enough to sweep a clear lane through the A-ring, like a pebble dragging a groove in sand. Farther out, the Keeler gap is shaped by another small moon, Daphnis. Here, the edges of the gap ripple and wave as particles respond to Daphnis' pull. These ripples can grow taller than mountains, casting long shadows when sunlight strikes at an angle. In this way, even the smallest moons leave their marks, delicate brushstrokes on Saturn's canvas. And then there are the shepherd moons of the F-ring, Prometheus and Pandora. They orbit on either side of the narrow ring, their gravitational tugs twisting its strands, pulling clumps of ice into arcs, stretching and braiding the ring into ever-changing patterns. The F-ring is never still. Each pass of its shepherds reshapes it slightly, as if Saturn's crown is being constantly rewoven. This intricate structure, rings divided by gaps, gaps carved by moons, divisions shaped by resonances, shows us how gravity sculpts beauty in silence. It is a dance of forces, delicate and precise, that turns billions of icy fragments into a work of cosmic art. When you imagine the rings tonight, try to see them not as static bands, but as a living system, gaps opening and closing, edges rippling with waves, particles shifting in response to unseen tugs. The rings are not frozen in time. They're alive with motion, always changing, always shaped by the embrace of Saturn's moons. And in that structure, both ordered and dynamic, we find the quiet truth of Saturn's rings. They are not just ornaments, but the visible result of a timeless dialogue between gravity, matter, and motion. If you were to look at Saturn's rings from far away, they might seem immense and solid, a wide, luminous band stretching across the planet's waste. But if you could drift to the edge of the rings and look at them sideways, you would be astonished. For despite their vast spread across space, the rings are unimaginably thin. Most of Saturn's rings are only about 10 to 30 meters thick, just a few stories tall. Some regions may be a little thicker, perhaps up to a kilometer, but compared to their immense width, hundreds of thousands of kilometers across, they are as thin as paper. Imagine laying a sheet of paper on a football field. That is the kind of proportion we are speaking of, so broad and yet so delicate. It seems almost impossible they could exist at all. This thinness gives the rings one of their most enchanting features, the shadows they cast. When Saturn tilts toward the sun, its rings spread a delicate shadow across the planet's clouds. Sometimes a shadow appears as a crisp, dark band encircling Saturn's body. At other times, when the sun is lower, the shadow stretches long and thin, a gentle veil wrapping the globe in twilight. And when Saturn tilts the other way, the planet casts its own shadow across the rings. It is a vast curved shadow, slowly moving as Saturn turns, a reminder that even the brightest bands of ice cannot escape the rhythm of day and night. These shadows are not just beautiful, they also reveal secrets. By studying the way shadows fall across the rings, astronomers can measure their thickness, their bends, even their subtle vertical ripples. In places, small moons create waves that rise above the plane of the rings, tiny hills of ice, towering higher than mountains on Earth, casting long, thin shadows that betray their hidden height. It is in these vertical structures that we glimpse the rings as truly three-dimensional. They are not just flat bands, but living layers, particles rising, falling, casting shadows and catching sunlight in endless patterns. Perhaps the most magical moment comes once every 15 years, when Saturn's rings turn edge-on to Earth. From our viewpoint, they nearly vanish, so thin, so delicate, that they slip from sight, becoming a faint line, like a thread drawn across the planet. For a time, it is as though Saturn has lost its crown, and then, slowly, as the planet continues its orbit, the rings return, spreading wide once more, reminding us of their grandeur. The vertical structure of Saturn's rings, their thinness, their shadows, their ripples, is a lesson in delicacy. It shows us that beauty need not be solid or permanent, that even the most fragile of arrangements can create wonder. So, tonight, when you imagine Saturn, try to picture its rings not just as a flat halo, but as a layered, three-dimensional world. Picture the shadows sliding across the planet, the faint ripples rising like whispers, the thin edge of the rings vanishing into space. And in that vision, you may sense the quiet balance that makes Saturn's rings so extraordinary, a harmony of width and thinness, of light and shadow, of strength and fragility, woven together into one timeless crown. When we gaze at Saturn through a telescope, the rings may appear as a delicate circle of light, fragile, thin, almost like a decoration. But in truth, their size is staggering, so vast that words alone struggle to capture it. The main rings, those bright, shining bands we can see from Earth, stretch outward for about 140,000 kilometers from the planet's center. That means the rings are more than twice as wide as Saturn itself. If Saturn and its rings were placed side by side on Earth, they would cover nearly the entire distance between New York and Los Angeles, or between London and Moscow. And yet, for all that immense width, remember how thin they are. Most of the rings measure only about 10 to 30 meters thick. It is like a giant disk of icy particles, spread across space, so wide it could span continents, yet so thin it could slip through a doorway. This combination of immensity and delicacy is part of what makes them so beautiful. They are large enough to encircle a planet and capture the attention of Earth across 1 billion kilometers, yet thin enough to almost vanish when viewed edge-on. To truly grasp the scale, imagine standing on Earth's surface. If a piece of Saturn's ring were placed in the sky, stretching across the horizon, it would cover an enormous portion of the heavens, a band of light wider than the moon, shining with icy brilliance. It would be impossible to miss, a constant reminder of the vastness of the cosmos. The particles within the rings also remind us of scale. Some are tiny, no larger than grains of dust. Others are immense, chunks of ice as large as houses or mountains. Together, billions upon billions of these pieces orbit Saturn in harmony, creating something that looks delicate from afar, but is built from countless fragments of very real, very solid matter. Another way to think of the scale is to compare Saturn's rings to Earth's features. The diameter of the main rings is about 270,000 kilometers, large enough to fit 4 Earths side by side within them. If Earth itself were placed inside Saturn's rings, the planet would appear small, a blue marble floating within a vast icy disk. This thought can make us feel small, but also connected, for the same forces of gravity and motion that hold Saturn's rings in place also shape Earth's orbit, the moon's path, and the dance of planets around the sun. So the rings are not only vast in size, they are vast in meaning. They remind us that scale is relative, and that beauty often comes from arrangements too large for us to fully comprehend. As you let these images settle into your mind, picture Saturn turning slowly in space, its rings spreading outward in a disk so wide, so thin, so fragile, that it seems almost impossible. And yet there it is, a masterpiece painted on the canvas of the cosmos. When we think about Saturn's rings, their beauty is undeniable, but their true wonder comes into focus only when we compare their scale to the familiar distances and worlds we know. Let us begin close to Saturn itself. The planet is surrounded by dozens of moons, from the giant Titan, with its thick orange atmosphere, to tiny shepherd moons, no larger than a mountain. And within this family, the rings are like a stage, stretching outward so wide that many of Saturn's smaller moons orbit inside or just beyond them. To imagine this, picture Titan, Saturn's largest moon. It is more than 5,000 kilometers across, bigger than Mercury, with lakes and rivers of liquid methane. Yet Titan, grand as it is, will look small when placed against the spread of Saturn's rings. The main ring system is over 50 times wider than Titan. What seems to be just a band of ice outshines even a moon the size of a world. If we look farther outward, the comparison grows even more astonishing. The width of Saturn's rings is nearly equal to the distance between the Earth and the moon. Imagine that the space that separates our planet from its glowing companion in the night sky. Saturn's rings could nearly span that gulf. The thought is humbling, as if Saturn carries a miniature Earth-Moon system wrapped around its waist in icy form. Now, bring the comparison closer to home. If the rings were placed around Earth, their shimmering arcs would stretch far beyond the sky. From one horizon to the other, they would dominate the heavens. In the daylight, they would scatter sunlight into delicate colors. At night, they would shine brighter than the Milky Way, a constant luminous crown above our heads. Imagine walking outside at dusk, and instead of a darkening sky, seeing a vast band of light arching across the heavens, woven with shadows and brightness. Civilizations would grow up beneath them, myths and legends would form around them, and every child would grow up knowing the rings not as distant wonders, but as part of daily life. But perhaps the most moving comparison is this: the width of the rings is greater than the diameter of Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system. Think of that, a ring system so expansive that it outstretches the very giant that rules our planetary family. And yet, these same rings are thinner than a city skyline. This paradox, vastness paired with fragility, is at the heart of Saturn's quiet beauty. So when you imagine Saturn tonight, try not only to see the rings as delicate ornaments, but as vast structures that rival the scale of worlds and orbits. They are not just features of a planet. They are cosmic landscapes, stretches of space so wide they could hold planets and moons within their reach, and still leave room to shine. Even though the numbers behind Saturn's rings are immense, the human mind often struggles with scale. Our everyday world is measured in meters, in kilometers, in the distances between our homes and cities. But when it comes to Saturn's rings, we need more than numbers. We need stories, images, and imagination to bring their true size into focus. Astronomers have long tried to capture this wonder. Early telescopes in the 1600s could barely reveal the shape of the rings, and yet even then, they seemed impossibly large. When Christian Huygens first studied Saturn, he imagined the rings as a thin, flat disk, not knowing how far they stretched, but sensing their grandeur. As telescopes improved, astronomers began to measure more precisely, comparing the rings to the size of the Earth itself. Even then, the scale seemed almost mythical, as though Saturn had been given a crown that no planet should be able to wear. But it wasn't until the age of spacecraft that their immensity became truly real. When Voyager 1 and 2 passed Saturn in the 1980s, their cameras showed the rings in detail, not a solid band, but billions of icy particles, each orbiting in its own path. The spacecraft were able to measure their spread, to show that the rings stretched outward for more than 270,000 kilometers. Suddenly, the numbers were not just theory, but images, pictures of a system so wide that Earth itself could nestle comfortably inside. Later, the Cassini spacecraft spent more than a decade circling Saturn, flying close to the rings, and even passing through the narrow gaps between them. For Cassini, the rings were not abstract features. They were landscapes, worlds of ice and shadow, where spacecraft could glide like explorers, sailing through a frozen sea. In the photographs Cassini sent back, we saw the rings not only in scale, but in intimacy. Ripples, waves, shadows, details that reminded us that these immense bands are also made of tiny, delicate pieces. And here is where the human perspective meets wonder. We, tiny beings on a small planet, can build machines that cross billions of kilometers to touch Saturn's crown. We measure, we photograph, we imagine, and through that imagination, the scale of the rings becomes part of us. If you close your eyes tonight, you might picture yourself standing on the surface of one icy ring particle. Around you stretch countless others, glittering like snow in the sunlight, orbiting together in silence. And if you were to look outward, you would see the curve of the rings, stretching away farther than sight could follow, encircling the planet in a vast, endless band. In that moment, scale would not be a number. It would be a feeling, a sense of being part of something, immeasurably large and immeasurably beautiful. So the scale of Saturn's rings is not only measured in kilometers, it is measured in wonder, in the stretch of our imagination, and in the ability of a fragile human mind to hold something so vast, so delicate, and so perfectly balanced in space. When we speak of Saturn and its rings, we are speaking not only of ice and gravity, but of something far deeper, a sense of wonder that has echoed through human history. For thousands of years, Saturn has been a beacon in our skies. The ancients looked upward, tracing its slow, steady journey among the stars. Unlike the twinkling of distant suns, Saturn shone with a steady, golden light. It was patient, deliberate, taking nearly 30 years to complete a single orbit. And so, many cultures associated Saturn with time, with endurance, with quiet strength. Yet even then, the true glory of Saturn was hidden. To the naked eye, its rings were invisible. The planet appeared as a wandering star, beautiful but ordinary. It wasn't until the invention of the telescope and Galileo's first glimpse in 1610 that the secret crown was revealed. And what a revelation it was. Galileo at first did not understand what he saw. The planet appeared flanked by strange ears, shapes unlike anything he had ever imagined. It was Christian Huygens, years later, who correctly described Saturn as surrounded by a thin ring. From that moment on, Saturn became not just a planet, but a symbol of mystery, a world with a beauty beyond expectation. In every generation since, the rings have stirred the same feeling. Astronomers, poets, artists, all have turned their gaze to Saturn. Try to capture in words, in numbers, in brushstrokes and music, what it feels like to see a planet adorned with such a crown. And here lies their timelessness. For while the rings are made of ice and rock, their true power is in how they make us feel. They remind us that the universe is not only functional, not only mechanical, but also profoundly beautiful. Nature could have created Saturn without rings, a plain sphere drifting through space. But instead, we are given this vision, a golden planet with a halo so vast, so delicate, that it stirs awe in every human heart that beholds it. When we speak of Saturn's timeless wonder, we are speaking of that universal reaction, the gasp of surprise, the pause of silence, the deep breath of recognition, that beauty exists even in the farthest reaches of space. And as we drift tonight, letting thoughts settle like snow on still water, we carry with us the knowledge that Saturn will continue to turn, its rings will continue to shine, and long after we are gone, its quiet beauty will remain, waiting for future eyes to look upward and feel the same wonder that we feel today. Saturn's wonder does not belong only to scientists. nor only to the observatories that watch it at night. It belongs to everyone, to the poets, the dreamers, the children who first look through a telescope and gasp at the sight of a ringed world. From the very beginning of history, the heavens have been a canvas for human imagination. We painted stories into stars, saw gods in the constellations, and traced our myths across the wandering planets. When Saturn appeared in the night sky, steady and golden, many cultures gave it meaning. The Romans saw it as the god of time and harvest, a slow, patient force that moved steadily across the heavens. In India, Saturn was Shani, a bringer of discipline and truth. And across the world, the planet's slow journey made it a symbol of endurance, of lessons learned over long stretches of life. But it was a discovery of its rings that expanded Saturn's place in human imagination. Artists painted it, writers described it, composers gave it voice. Gustav Holst, in his famous suite The Planets, gave Saturn a movement that feels heavy, slow, and timeless, capturing the weight of ages. In literature, Saturn's rings became metaphors for crowns, for halos, for the beauty that adorns even the coldest worlds. And then came the age of modern photography. Images of Saturn from Voyager, and later from Cassini, were shared across the globe. Children in classrooms stared in wonder. Artists drew inspiration for films and stories. And dreamers found in Saturn a reminder that the universe is larger and more beautiful than anything we can build with our own hands. The timelessness of Saturn is not just in its age or in the persistence of its orbit. It is in its ability to inspire across generations, to remind us that beauty is not fleeting, but woven into the fabric of the cosmos. Every time someone looks at Saturn's rings, whether through a telescope, in a photograph, or in the quiet of imagination, that person joins a chain of wonder, stretching back centuries and reaching forward into the future. This is Saturn's gift, to stand in the sky as a steady presence, a planet both distant and intimate, its crown of rings shimmering across time. It invites us to pause, to look up, to remember that even in the silent stretches of space, there exists beauty meant to be seen, meant to be felt, meant to remind us of our place in something vast and eternal. And so, Saturn is not only a planet, it is a mirror for human imagination. It reflects back to us our longing for beauty, our search for meaning, and our joy at discovering that the universe, even in its farthest corners, holds wonders beyond measure. As we near the end of our quiet exploration, let us pause one final time to reflect on Saturn's timeless wonder, not only as it has been, but as it will continue to be. For the rings of Saturn, as breathtaking as they are not eternal. Scientists believe that, slowly, they are fading. Particles fall inward, pulled by gravity, drawn into Saturn's atmosphere. In distant ages, the rings may dim until one day they vanish. But here is the gentle truth. Their beauty is not lessened by their impermanence. In fact, it is made more precious. The rings remind us that even the most majestic wonders of the cosmos exist within time, and that fleeting beauty is still eternal in the hearts of those who see it. For us, here and now, Saturn's crown still shines. Through telescopes, through spacecraft, through photographs and imagination, we can admire its quiet glow, its perfect balance of fragility and grandeur. And in doing so, we are part of something greater. Every gaze, every breath of awe adds to the timeless story of Saturn's wonder. Long after we are gone, others will feel the same astonishment. And in that way, the rings will live on, not only in the heavens, but in the human spirit. So tonight, as you rest, let Saturn's image stay with you. Picture the golden planet, slowly turning, its icy rings spreading outward like a crown of light. Picture their vastness, their thinness, their delicate shadows drifting across the planet's clouds. Picture their stillness, their endless motion, their quiet beauty floating in the silence of space. And know this, Saturn's wonder is timeless, because wonder itself is timeless. It is passed from heart to heart, generation to generation, a light carried forward. As steady as the planet's orbit, may its beauty remind you of the vastness of the universe and of the quiet, eternal peace that can be found when we lift our eyes to the stars. Good night and goodbye. May your dreams be gentle, your rest be deep, and your spirit like Saturn's crown, forever wrapped in quiet wonder.